So welcome everybody to this Talking Change World Cafe. As you know, some months ago, we launched a series of expert series videos to deep dive a little bit in some related issues such as psychology, behavioral insights, sociology. And today we wanted to dedicate a little bit of space for our colleagues to discuss with some of these SBC practitioners that have immense expertise and knowledge. So thank you very much to everybody on the call for attending, and particularly to our experts, not only for today, but also because they played a big role in developing the videos, and they will keep on working hand in hand with us in the development of SBC podcast in the coming months. So thank you all, first of all, and also enjoy the space. We wanted to create a space that is a little bit different from the webinar, and therefore our colleagues from Common Thread will be supporting us today with the approach and the format. We hope is going to be interactive, is going to be fresh, is going to be interesting. So please do not hesitate to ask questions. Of course, we will allocate the last 30 minutes or so to answer them, but you can always do it while the experts are presenting their pieces. And yeah, I hope this is engaging. So much more ahead to come. So let me pass now the microphone to Ipsita, who will host us today during our time together. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Helena. Just really quickly, my name is Ipsita. You can also refer to me as Ips, and I am a behavioral scientist at Common Thread. I will be co-facilitating today's session with Michael, who goes by Mike. He is a director and co-founder at Common Thread. So if you guys have any questions throughout the session, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat, or once the Q&A goes live. In the end of today's session, we will be passing over to you all. And for those brave folks who wouldn't mind going off mute and putting their videos on, there will be a Q&A session in the end. So don't worry, all your questions will get answered. And thank you again for joining us today and filling out the survey. I can see about 16 people responded to the survey. So really quickly, let's look at the results from the check-in you just responded to. Okay, so we have quite a lot of diversity in terms of where people are coming in from today. So welcome, everybody. Once again, if you missed this in the beginning, if anybody would like to listen to this session in French or Spanish, you can turn on the interpretation mode on Zoom. But otherwise, thank you so much. This is great to see. This is great to see on a world map where everyone's coming from. So welcome. And then let's have a look at, yes, the thoughts on SBC. Okay, so I'm not surprised. I think there's a little bit of self-selection going on here. People coming into this call probably like SBC or want to hear good things about it. So the two sort of negative statements, SBC is confusing and overhyped, have received a lower score, which means most people here agree in the power of SBC. So that's a great note to kick off the session on. Thank you again for participating. And once again, if you have any questions, keep putting them in the chat. We'll be closely monitoring them. So now I would love to jump into getting to know our panelists. We have some really eminent, talented experts joining us today. And I'd love to extend a warm welcome to all of our lovely panelists. And if you guys don't mind, may I request that one by one, maybe starting off with Laura, if we can come off mute and introduce ourselves, panelists. Just in terms of what to keep in mind in your introductions, it would be great if you could mention, of course, your name, where you're based, what you do, if you'd like, what your area of expertise is, and then maybe one thing you're excited to talk about today. And then lastly, we have given our panelists a fun question to answer as well, which was, Hollywood has decided to make a movie about SBC. What is the title and who plays you in the movie? So we're really excited to hear what our panelists have to say. Laura, if you don't mind coming off mute, please.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Laura de Molière. I am an applied behavioral scientist. So my background is in cognitive decision sciences, but I have spent most of my career in the UK government, where I led behavioral science team in Cabinet Office. But since the start of my PhD, I've also started to apply behavioral science to social economic development. I'm attracted by the complexity of the problems there. And that's what I do these days full time, based out of Germany. What I'm excited to talk about today, I found that the hardest question to answer because behavioral science is really what I love talking about today. But really happy to dip into things like AI, or when it gets very complex and, you know, venturing into areas that behavioral science hasn't ventured in before. That's kind of what I really enjoy. With regards to my movie would be called Honey, I Shrunk the Context, which is all about how we're battling to get the context back into behavioral science in the last 5 to 10 years. And because I am really face blind and cannot recognize any actors, this would be an animated movie, and I would be played by Summer from Rick and Morty, which is maybe a bit niche, but you can Google her, she's cool.
Wonderful, that's so exciting. We're definitely talking about AI and new ventures, so would love to hear from you. Nelson, if you don't mind going next, would love to hear from you.
Yeah, so my name is Nelson Aseka. I'm based out of Kenya, and my expertise is in driving peer-to-peer communication at scale using the power of AI. I think what I'm really excited about speaking about today is leveraging the power of AI to drive peer-to-peer communications at scale to accelerate social behavioral change. So that's one thing I'll be dwelling quite a bit on. And in terms of movie, I really sat down and I'm thinking that, you know, I would say the title of the movie would be The Influence Effect, then revolutionizing communication at scale. And I think the actor that would best fit my profile and character and what this business is, my story brings out would be Michael B. Jordan. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with him. I think his versatility as an actor and also, you know, his ability to portray strong, influential characters makes him a really fitting candidate to bring out, you know, my story to life on the big screen. And I think something else, of course, I would add is that his youthful charisma, which is something which I'm lacking maybe today, would, you know, really resonate with the audiences as actors would love to do it. So yeah, that's me.
Wonderful. I'm getting excited the way we're talking about it. I thought the movie is made and it's ready to watch. Thank you, Nelson, for joining us today. I would love to move on to Xaher and then Monica as well.
Thank you. Everyone, my name is Xahel Gul. I'm based in Karachi, Pakistan. I'm a clinician and I specialize in integrating SBC approaches and multi-level health system strengthening approaches, looking particularly with a focus on SBC-informed private sector engagement for the private health sector. I think I'm really excited today to be talking about issues related to power, paternalism, and potentially decolonisation of SBC as a profession and as a programmatic approach. And for the movie, I thought the apt title for my production would be Everything, Everywhere, Everyone, All at Once. And it's a close tie between a good lady. I want to go with Keanu Reeves, but I think Morgan Freeman might be much more impactful. So there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Xaher. We're really lucky to have you here today. And then lastly, Monica, would love to hear from you.
Thanks so much, Ibs, and thanks so much for the invitation to have me here today. I'm delighted to be speaking with all the panelists as well. My name is Monica Wills Silva. I am based in London, but I am originally Colombian, so my heart is more in Latin America. And I am the Director of International Programs at the Behavioral Insights team, where I've been for about 8 to 9 years. My main focus or area of expertise has been applying behavioral sciences in the global south, in low and middle income countries, and I have a background in economics and political science. And I'm very excited to hear the other panelists more than speaking today, but I also want to talk about the behavioral manifesto that we've released recently, which I'm really excited to share, because we've been thinking a lot about where the field is at, like a little bit of like a reflection of what we've achieved so far and where we think it should go next, given the tools that we have available. And in my case specifically, what that means for low and middle income countries in our work in development. And on the movie, I've actually have to confess that I'm surprised all of the panelists replied so seamlessly to this question, because I actually found it a very hard one. So I actually crowdsourced it from my team and used ChatGPT, because I just couldn't think of any answers for either of those two questions myself. And we reached two titles. One was more like a documentary, and the other one's a thriller, I would say. For the documentary, it would be something like The New Marginal Revolution, Changing Behaviors to Change Lives. And the thriller would be more like Mind Games, The Human Equation. And in terms of who would play me, I actually started chatting to ChatGPT about this one and almost got into a fight, I've got to say. Because ChatGPT started suggesting very stereotypical Latin American actresses. So I'm going to go for like a niche, not well-known Colombian actress called Natalia Reyes that was on Terminator 2, just because I would like to be her platform. And that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Monica. That was great. And thank you, everyone. Those were some wonderful introductions. We're really excited to have you and learn from you here today. Without further ado, I would love to pass on to Mike to talk through the objectives and agenda for today's session.
Great. Thank you so much. I know we want to hear from the experts. No one wants to hear from me for too long. So my film would probably be dazed and confused. But just to kind of really get to what we're going to be doing for the next 80 minutes or so together. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time. It's a busy, it's a stressful moment in the world at the moment. And I know that everyone is busy and everyone is taking some valuable time to be with us today. So thank you. I also wanted to say webinars can sometimes be a bit one way. They can be not so interactive. They can be something that happens in the background. So we've really tried today to break up the session into little segments. So some of them are a little traditional. We have a moment for a kind of Q&A discussion. Others are a bit, we're going to have a game along the way. We're also going to hear from participants directly in the form of a video question from three of your colleagues who have sent in questions from their point of view, from their context, from the point of view of applying social and behavior change strategies and work at the country level. The other thing we can do on webinars, though, is really have these language channels. So if you just allow me for 20 seconds, just a quick shout out to our long-term partners at Natakalam. They will be doing the interpretation and translation today. For those of you who don't know them, they support refugee talent and conflict-affected individuals as language teachers, as interpreters, as cultural guides. So we're really, really honored to have them today. So let me just say, please ask a question anytime. The format sometimes means that you'll be listening a fair amount, but you can ask a question anytime. We can't promise we will get to them all, but we can promise we will have them all answered. So we'll be following up with a summary, an edited version of this as soon as possible after the session. So just to say, we're going to start with this warm-up game, get the panelists all warmed up after their films and they're thinking about how SBC can be applied in the world. These are all questions that have been inspired by submissions that we've heard from all of you. So thank you again. But there's a bit of a randomness to that, which we'll explain when we get there. Then we'll get into more of a kind of traditional panel discussion where we'll have a Q&A. And then, as I said, we're going to hear from voices from the field, where we have questions coming in from Sokoto, from Ethiopia, from Lebanon. And then lastly, we're going to open things up to you. Any reflections, any questions, any comments will be happening with the last 30 minutes or so of the session. So that's what we're doing today. Really, ultimately, our objective is to further, bring together these leaders from the social change and behavior change space so that you can hear from them, ask them questions, help you navigate the challenges you're facing and what might be coming in terms of your challenges in the coming days, months, and years. So with all that, I'm going to turn back to Ips to take us to the first game. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, so here on the screen, you're now seeing our game, which is not a very creative title, but it's called Question Bowl. So as Mike kind of said, some of these questions are inspired from, or just taken directly from the questions the audience submitted. So thank you everyone for that. Just a quick explanation of how the game works. So we'll be inviting each expert now to pick a random number from 1 to 7. And essentially, once they've picked their numbers, we will be unhiding the numbers. Yeah, let's, for the sake of an example, let's take 3. Yeah, and here you go, unveiled. If I could recommend any book or paper or podcast, it would be. And actually, just for the sake of the game, we might kick off with this one. So experts, you can't pick 3 anymore. You're going to have to pick one of the other numbers. And we will just invite each expert to share which they picked, and then obviously go into the answer that they have for the question. So it's a little bit keeping them on their toes. And just wanted to say that if another expert wants to chime in, then please feel free to. It's not just one question for one expert. But yeah, let's kick off with 3 if that makes sense to everyone. And may I just open the floor to any expert to come in and maybe take the first stab at which book or paper or podcast they love about SBC.
I'm happy to jump in. There's a paper I tend to recommend, which is actually an old one, but I think is a really good one for anyone interested in SBC and behavioral science generally and starting to read up about it. It's a paper by Daniel Kahneman called Maps of Bounded Rationality. And I find it a very helpful one because it takes you through different cognitive biases and it explains the underlying experiments behind them as well in quite a succinct way. So I think it's a really good start for anyone interested in SBC. In terms of book, there's one that it's not so much behavioral science classic, but I think is a really good complement to how we think about data and how we think empirically, which is a book called Factfulness by Hans Rosling and his children as well. And it's a really good book to think about like how we approach data collection, how we think about categories within data, how we expand beyond the sort of black or white basically dynamics that sometimes come in place when we're thinking about the world in numbers. I think it's a really good one. And in terms of podcasts, I love recommending podcasts by women. I think women should get more spotlights in our field. So I would say Choiceology by Katie Milkman is a good one. And I also really like A Slight Change of Plans by Maya Shankar, who's the previous head of behavioral science at Google.
Thank you, Monica. Those are excellent suggestions. I can see maybe Xaher, are you interested in?
I can jump. Yes, so I would recommend the pedagogy of the oppressed by Paulo Freire. I think it's very, very foundational piece, which, if it doesn't already, should be permeating SBC at a very foundational level. It certainly created direction for me to figure out, all right, this is where we're going wrong. This is how we can sort of address the issues around power and paternalism. And it really does open one's eyes. So it's a thin book. It's not very big. And I've posted a link to it, which is available online. But just a quick warning, each paragraph needs to be read several times for you to get the full impact of what Freire was saying in that. So I encourage you to keep it close by, maybe do one paragraph at a time, come back and revisit it. I'm still coming through my digital copy of it, even 20 years after I first read it. So absolutely, yes. Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire.
Wonderful, thank you so much. May I just check Laura and Nelson if you had any as well?
Yeah, sure. I can go in next. For a book, I really like Thinking in Systems. It's a great introduction to systems thinking, which I think we all agree is highly relevant to the world of behavioral science as we apply it in kind of complex scenarios. And related to that, I also really recommend the Cynefin framework from David Snowden. It's a sense-making framework for what we do when we are presented with different kinds of problems and information in terms of how we best act. Should we, probe the problem and test something? Should we apply best practice and so on? I think it's a really relevant framework to the problems that we face as behavioral scientists. I have to admit, I'm not big on podcasts. I really much prefer having something written down, and I recommend the blog Frontline BSci by Colin Strong. Sometimes I write there as well. I think it's a really nice, slightly less mainstream way of looking at behavioral science and going in the breadth of the behavioral sciences. So not just looking at psychology, but often also actually sociological and anthropological approaches, which I think are really relevant.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Nelson, no pressure, but if you had any, would be lovely to hear.
No, I don't particularly have any, but I think I've also written down, the suggestions from my co-panelists, which are really great. Yeah, but happy to pick the next number.
Okay, lovely. Why don't we go with that then, Nelson? What was your number?
All right, I'll go with number 2.
Okay. So that says the private sector seems to have embraced and taken advantage of SBC. What are they doing that we are not in the development sector?
Fantastic. I think it ties in very well with what Affluence came from into, from the private sector practices or strategies into developmental sector. And just to give you a quick background, Affluence, the idea Affluence came from above, believe it or not. So I was responsible for growing a whiskey brand in the Kenyan market from zero to the highest selling whiskey within 7 months using specific influencer strategies that I was able to put in place that were able to drive now the customer acquisition and growth for the brand. And this entailed basically me sitting, in bars and understanding that, the bartenders were the most trusted people to consumers when it came to drink suggestions, and quickly realizing that I need to round these people up and use them as mouthpieces to drive uptake for this brand, because everyone trusted them with their domain expertise behind the bar to understand anything about drinks. So this worked in the Kenyan market. I was promoted into Sub-Saharan Africa and repeated this in different regions, and it worked very well. And I sat down and thought, if I could put this strategy onto a tech platform, I could use it to grow any brand or drive any messaging anywhere in the world. And that's how Affluence came about. And then we started in 2020, January, the year of COVID. And our platform was ready in March 2020, just in time for COVID, and which meant that what we built our platform for, which was for driving brands, to help brands to drive customer acquisition and growth and stuff, was slowed down because brands were not investing in advertising at the point. So in sitting down and thinking and seeing what was going on around us, I realized that, a lot of developmental partners were looking for ways to reach the masses and drive awareness around, COVID and, SBC campaigns to, drive behavior change around it. So I was like, wait a minute, with our platform, I'm able to use AI to identify key opinion leaders or down to community levels, in the grassroots levels in communities, that could be used impactfully to, convey messaging to their community members that would drive behavior change. So that's how it came around. And what I'm driving to is that in the private sector, organizations are effectively leveraging marketing and advertising strategies to drive social behavior change initiatives. They are utilizing targeted messaging, data-driven insights and innovative communication techniques to not only promote their products and services, but also influence consumer behavior positively. So I think this approach allows the private sector to really create a direct and immediate impact on consumer choices and preferences. So at Affluence, we've integrated a similar marketing and advertising strategies in the developmental sector. to deliver SBC by leveraging on the power of AI driven communications to precisely target specific audiences, understand their preferences, and create compelling messaging that drives meaningful behavior change to these communities. So our approach uses the strategic use of data analytics, personalized messaging, and influential storytelling to drive and foster positive social impact. So yeah, hopefully that answers it.
That is really exciting stuff. I can see Xahher raised his hand, but may I just request just keeping an eye on the time. We do need to move on fairly quickly. So I would love to pose a little challenge in a non-patronizing way to the panelists. If you could maybe try and answer the question in a minute, because we are running a little bit behind. But Xahher, over to you for your question and as well as your number. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'll say one sentence. I think one of the key aspects that the private sector is doing differently is that they are tracking a very specific outcome for their investments, which is really the bottom line and revenues and numbers and income to cost ratios. And those are driven by consumer behaviors. They're actually tracking and reporting behavior that's make or break for them. So that's something that we kind of take more lightly in the development space, which I think also relates to all the things that Nelson said. All of those things feed into this. Sorry, that was long.
No, absolutely. That's such a good point. May I also ask what number you had picked, Xahher, if you would love to answer yours?
5.
Okay. So that's when you think about SBC, what is SBC and what isn't? How do you explain it to people outside the space to encourage them?
A 30-second challenge. All right. So if anything that you're designing or trying to do, if you think it's going to change thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and connected behaviors specifically, it's going to be SBC. Whether it's with decision makers, whether it's with implementers, individuals, community level, if your work is really trying to change the way people think or perceive certain aspects of their own lives that are linked to some behaviors, then it's definitely SBC. It may or may not translate into a specific behavior, but things like shifting social norms is around shifting perceptions of norms first before the behavior happens. So if it's going to change the way people think and feel, that's SBC.
Nice. What an excellent summary. Laura, may I invite you to pick your number and answer?
Sure. I take number 4.
Okay. Thank you. So that's what is one question in your work that you wish everybody asked?
So I'll answer this one briefly. I wish that everyone asked, is this realistic? Is this a realistic aim? Can we actually achieve this with the use of behavioral science? Because I think sometimes behavioral scientists actually bring expertise as to whether or not one can or could change behaviors with the time and the resources you have at hand. And if not, behavioral scientists can often look at different aims, maybe choosing a different target audience, looking at a different target behavior, kind of planning the change over a course of a longer time span, specifically when it's about kind of things like social cohesion, societal issues that often take a little bit more time. So I think realistic aims would be something that I'd love to discuss a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure people listening are really resonating with that. And then last but not the least, Monica, just remembering you have, what number did you pick?
I'll go with number 1.
Okay, wonderful. When people look back on how SBC is today, they will say.
Oh, that's an exciting one. And maybe I'll sneak in, because I really like Laura's one as well. I'll sneak in a little bit of like an answer to that one too, because I would love for people to ask more about what the global North can learn from the global South, what we can learn from like low and middle income countries and the sort of research that we're doing. So I think my dream in the future would be that people look back to this time and you'll feel like behavioral science is a commonplace. Like the research that we're doing is just everything, it's part of the day-to-day in terms of policy making and like program design. And people will actually be wondering more how we weren't doing this in the first place, if that makes sense. I hope that we get to a point where like evidence-based policy making and program design is just our default, basically, that we're just defaulting to think about what works and what doesn't work every time we're thinking about designing everything for people, and with behaviors in the center of it, hopefully fueled by the evidence that we're generating in low and middle income countries, and not just looking at more Western countries and the global north.
Wouldn't that be nice? Thank you so much, everyone. Those were some wonderful answers to come up with really quickly. I'm sorry to rush you along. It's just that we're trying to keep an eye on the time because we can go on and on about this. But thank you so much. I think that was a really nice warm up for just the Q&A. We would love to move on to maybe some of the heavier topics now. For instance, one of the critiques of SBC has been that maybe it's not equipped to deal with the serious topics we're seeing in the world. So stuff like climate change, war and conflict, racism, ongoing battles with gender equality. And Xaher kind of mentioned earlier, decolonization is becoming a bit of a buzzword and an important one to address. So yes, experts, we would love to hear, the work that you do, how does it fit into these worlds, if at all it does? And can it help? And if it can, how can it help? And just while we're going into these heavier topics, we would love if you could maybe gear your answers a little bit towards the practical side as well, because we have some wonderful people joining us today, maybe who are keen to hear what are the takeaways that they're going to apply to their work. So what are some practical things, maybe things that you have learned through many years of struggle or failure, equally things that were an overnight success, like things that you would, like practical advice you would give to people joining us today. So if I can kick off this discussion on climate change, we will be getting to, by the way, I know Mike kind of framed this, we'll be getting to conflict and war, because those are really, really prominent issues right now. We will be getting to that, but just so, I know that there's a question that was submitted from the audience on that. So if we can maybe push that to the next section and kind of cater to the other ones, promise we'll be getting to those. So yes, on climate change, Xaher, I was thinking if I could maybe throw you this question. So I was thinking about this. There's a bit of an ongoing debate about, how relevant is prioritizing individual level behavior versus systemic level behavior. So actions of large corporations or governments, and sort of what is the balance we should be striking for? What can SBC teach us about this balance? Like, who are the important players here? And what do we know from maybe your work in addressing climate change using behavioral science and related domains of SBC?
Right, thank you. So I'm a health systems wonk, so I of course use that lens, and more recently we've been looking at health system resilience in the context of climate change, and women and children are some worst affected population segments because of the impact of climate change, particularly in my part of the world, right, where we are paying an unduly heavy price for the impact of climate change on the environment. Now, one of the core drivers within SBC is that, and the assumption, and that's why we have the S and the B together, social and behavioral, is that behaviors don't take place in a vacuum. They don't take place because certain factors, only because of certain factors that sort of operate in that moment. Behaviors take place because of factors that have transpired over the last few hundred years to create the kind of culture and the language and what meaning it affords people. So in the field of work and the sphere that I am working in, particularly on SRHR and contraception, access to safe abortion care, we see specific behaviors at the level of the individual, yes, certainly. However, one of the key elements is that
Xaher, I think we've lost your audio there.
I'm happy to jump in, just very briefly. Well, we've been looking at this issue. Is one of the ones that we're like concerning a lot ourselves with currently, including looking at, we recently published a report on how can we apply behavioral sciences to get to net zero. And one of the things that we've been looking within that is the stats that the climate change committees released that basically shows that about 62% of what we want to achieve in terms of emission reductions could be achieved through behavioral change. Be that things like adoption of new technologies, like electric vehicles, heat pumps, like making homes energy efficient, or things like just lifestyle changes, like eating less meat and less dairy, being more active, and so on. And what we found in our research is that if you ask people, 9 out of 10 people will tell you that they actually want to engage in more sustainable ways of living and that they want to adopt some of these behaviors. But simultaneously, what we find is that there's still lots of barriers in the, say, built environment, in the space around them, and like very small things, very small frictions that might decrease those behaviors. So there's a lot of space to win in the sort of behavioral space of getting to net zero. Within that, we found interesting things like, for instance, if you ask people to recycle, even within their household space, they might be very likely to do so in a space like the kitchen, because they've adapted the kitchen to be suitable for recycling, but they might not do it in the bathroom, even though it's the same person, and they might not just be recycling those bottles. So just thinking about those really small frictions. And then just to go back to Xaher, who's now back, maybe we can like circle back to his answer as well there. I completely agree that like basically this does not happen in isolation, right? Like behaviors are happening within systems. And a lot of the times also if the system's not in place, the behavior might not make a difference, right? If you're thinking about things like a recycling system, if you go to some of the contexts in low income countries, if there's no recycling process in place, why are we asking individuals to recycle at home if that's not going to get to like the actual outcome that we're hoping to achieve? So you can't look at behaviors in isolation. You have to look at them in the wider context, in the wider system that they're happening in, if that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah. So I think when we are talking about kind of individual level behavior change and more system level behavior change, I think we're using this language. We are maybe neglecting that these individual behaviors are also behaviors that often actually happen as part of groups, right? So what we mean really is citizens' behaviors, and then we have, the big corporations and government decisions and so on. But let's look for a brief second on this individual level behavior change. There's a really nice model, just thinking about the applied side here, called the social identity model of pro-environmental action, called SYMPIA, and I'm happy to post the link, which describes that as humans, when we are engaging in pro-environmental action, especially when these actions are kind of small and we don't necessarily see the immediate benefit, which is one of the big issues that we have when it comes to climate change, that this is going to be more likely to happen when we have a strong group identity. So like, we, the Colombians, for example, and then we collectively appraise this as a problem and find collective solutions. And just to give you a quick example of how we recently instrumentalized this, we were, I think it was in Colombia, actually, was a small trial that we ran with a gated community where there were issues with recycling. And we said, you know what, if you reach a target collectively, we'll throw you a party. It was a nice sandwich design. And said party increased recycling rates quite significantly once people viewed themselves as part of a bigger group around this problem, once they saw that the solutions were contributing to something together and they had a reward together. So I think it's often actually really quite worth seeing the group social identity pictures around these tricky behaviors. Sorry, and now Xahar, you're back. Welcome back.
So I'll just quickly say one thing to wrap up. I think we both sort of covered that nuance really well. I think for programmers, particularly in the space that we're working in the development sector, one of the ways of accounting for this, that multi-level approach is to think about very specific behaviors that are linked across the social ecological landscape. So it's, yes, the context matters, we need to know this, but we need to know who the key influencers are, what their specific behavior is that needs to shift. From that higher level, you go to the community level. You think about what behavior will facilitate the household, and from that to the institutional and so on. And I think having that chain of specific behaviors which feed into each other is really foundational to SBC, and for climate change becomes even more critical to look at it that way, because no one individual will do one behavior in isolation unless the S part of SBC is also shifting at the same time.
Absolutely. Nelson, you've had your hand raised for a second.
Yeah, sorry about that. Just wanted to chime in on the work we've done in climate change using local influencers and their significant potential in driving awareness and action, especially when it comes to African communities. So at iFluence, we've flipped the influencer model on its head, and we've moved away from using celebrities and socialites because we've found that they're too far detached from the local communities. But we are using people within the communities who are influential amongst themselves. So whether operating or online or offline, they have a unique ability to connect with their audiences on a personal and relatable level. So by leveraging on their known storytelling techniques, they can effectively convey the urgency and the impact of climate change in their communities quite effectively.
Thank you all so much. I think there were some really rich insights from your practical work, as well as links to models and work that's been done. So as Mike just put on the chat, we will be happy to collate all the resources that are being mentioned, so you don't have to worry about opening all the links. But yes, I love that practicality lens that you've all taken to answer that. So if we could move on maybe to thinking about the same theme, we kind of mentioned the difference in social versus behavioral, and then the deeply rooted, almost cultural and social practices that vary by the country you're working in as well. And maybe how that relates to gender-based work. Monica, I know that your team and you have led some great work on gender-based violence in El Salvador and Honduras. So just wondering if you think SBC can help mitigate such gender-based or maybe culture-based issues, as well as if there's any practical advice that you would like to share with other SBC practitioners who might be navigating these complex issues.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very happy to share some of our work in that space. It's also one that I'm very, very passionate about. I care a lot about our work in gender-based violence, especially. I think in terms of practical advice, that we've been working in this space for a few years now. And I think one of the things that we found, especially at the start, because it all was kicked off by an evidence review, was that the scarcity of evidence meant that not a lot of research was being done in this space, right? So we've endeavored to, while thinking about carefully how we can apply behavioral sciences to a topic that requires so much safeguarding and being quite cautious, also producing that level of evidence so that we can carry on building in this space. In terms of recommendations, we approach this as we would any policy challenge, and especially complex challenges, which is start by breaking it down, basically. If you talk about gender-based violence, it feels quite overwhelming. It feels like quite a complex problem. And what we've done is try and map out, on the one hand, who are the actors that you might want to target? What are the behaviors that you might want to target within that? What can you measure with what's there already? What sort of data you need to start collecting from scratch? I think if I was to tell anyone who wanted to work in the space where to start, that would be it. Just break it down first, map it out, try and understand the areas for the opportunities for intervention and what you can and can't measure. And whilst doing that, one of our main focus has been the work with women. So we've done quite a few trials on encouraging help-seeking behaviors. For instance, in Chile, we run an intervention looking at whether we could reduce dropout rates of women going to the judicial system. And we found that creating interventions that remove some of the friction and remove uncertainty aversion, by which I mean the fact that women were likely to drop off the processes because not only did they not know the outcome of the process itself, but they didn't know what the immediate next step was going to be. They didn't know who was going to be at court, how am I going to enter, what's going to happen in this place. And so we created an intervention whereby we would send them text messages throughout their journey. And we would also send them updates when there weren't any updates, so that they knew that there was still someone there supporting them throughout that process to address some of that uncertainty aversion that we saw in our initial field work. And we saw a reduction of about 30% in dropout rates and women completing the process. And also we saw a reduction in the cases that were dismissed by judges because of lack of evidence. So we're seeing impacts on really strong real world outcomes that can make a difference here. We've also slowly have been looking at whether there's an opportunity for us to leverage emergent technologies in this space. So we've been doing quite a few trials focusing on the use of chatbots, for instance, and in South Africa, to help adolescent girls identify unhealthy behaviors in our relationships very early on. So one of the things that we have found was that basically because of availability bias partly, and the fact that a lot of the campaigns and a lot of the media tends to portray violence as very physical and not so much emotional, economic, or social violence. We have endeavored to encourage women to identify other types of violence in their relationships and try to identify unhealthy behaviors. And we found that a chatbot that was gamified, whereby the girls could interact with it and choose their own story, it reflected a messenger similar to theirs, so it was also an adolescent girl. It increased identification of those unhealthy behaviors, and it decreased self-reported measurements of intimate partner violence. So there's a lot of emergent evidence showing promise in this space. And one of the things that we want to do more of going forwards is not only focus on the women, because as we've talked about these, we're not going to solve these problems if we just focus on a target group or on a specific behavior in isolation. These behaviors happen in a wider social system. And that's why we're trying to push more for us to also focus on bystander interventions, getting people or third parties to intervene, and obviously also focusing on the men themselves, anything that we can do on the deterrent side of things, on their recidivism side of things. So we're trying to push our interventions in that space too.
Such incredible work. I really like that almost parallel. So the practical advice there being break it down when you're approaching a complex topic or issue, but then also the realization that people in the target population itself likes when you simplify things, like the court example you gave. People like to know what are the practical steps that they will be taking. So always breaking things down and almost thinking of the end user, that's some great feedback there. So thank you, Monica. I see, Laura, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, just one additional kind of practical point when it comes to these kind of topics. For me is the importance of thinking about behavioral risk. So in other words, ensuring that we think about how could our intervention make things accidentally worse. When it comes to intervening in complex systems, there are often impacts that we can't anticipate, and in these instances, the impacts can be quite disastrous. So it's important that we apply some frameworks. For example, there's the in-case framework. Again, I shared, which I had developed with my team as part of the UK government to think of different kinds of behavioral risks, to anticipate that, and then also to measure it as part of as part of the evaluation program. Oh yeah, and one more point. I think when it comes to some of these topics, like violence against women, it can, from a practitioner point of view, sometimes feel like, we won't put violence to zero tomorrow, so we can only make small steps. But I like to think of it as running two tracks. The first one does anything we can do right now to improve the user journey, to improve access to certain services, right? In this kind of way that Monica has been talking about. And then the other track, which I know Monica's team is also doing, but just to kind of surface this, is this kind of longer term behavior change piece where we're slowly changing attitudes, changing values, changing norms, and so on. And it can be quite satisfying to see the relatively more quick impact in the first hand, but keep an eye on the longer price as well.
Absolutely. It sort of goes back to what Xaher mentioned about the private sector, like knowing what are the intended outcomes you're looking out for and kind of measuring them along the way. So you do see the quick wins, but you also know what you're looking out for in the long run. Monica kind of gave us a really lovely segue there, which I didn't take, but if I can return to that about emerging technologies and maybe the use of artificial intelligence and how you all kind of foresee the future for AI and SBC. Would be lovely to hear. I mean, I think Nelson mentioned earlier, so Nelson, maybe we can come back to that because I didn't quite give you enough time, but how are you using AI in your work, and what do you think the areas of both opportunities as well as threats are?
Well, thank you for that. How we actually use AI in our work is, like speaking to the practices I was talking about earlier from, the private sector. So we are using AI to deeply understand the target audience that we are targeting to drive the SBC impactfully with. So we understand who they are, what they like, what they do, the activities, likes, interests, and things like that. We dive deeper to understand, their persona in terms of behavioral science, psychographic analysis, behavioral analysis, sentiment analysis, to gain deep insights into this audience, which enables us to create content that actually speaks to their hearts and minds, right? So using modules of AI that run this analysis is able to give us that. And then the next thing is that we're able to re-engineer the process and identify people who lie in their trust networks. So this become now the potential influencers, who we like to call influencers, because like I said, we flipped around the model of this influencer kind of strategies. So these influencers will get probably hundreds of thousands of them, but we have to sieve them down to get the right people who drive the right messaging impactfully to that audience. So we first will vet them for an affinity to the messaging. So for instance, if it's a health service campaign, we will, our tech will be able to identify people who have an affinity to, health. So for instance, it could be a local health worker within that community. And then also we'll be able to use AI to understand the emotional connection between this potential influencer and the audience. So how we do this is that based on how people respond to their posts. So if this person, for the last 20 posts, what was the most engaging post? So you'll find maybe 3. And then looking at the engagements in terms of comments and replies, was it generally positive, neutral, or negative? So we'll go for the most positive. So AI helps us to, first of all, understand the audience and identify the right people who will be able to effectively pass on the messaging in a very relatable and believable way. So for us, that's how AI comes in.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Nelson. Laura, I remember you saying in your introduction that to discuss AI as well. So could I invite you to share your thoughts on the same?
Sure. So I think the first point that I will make is around the use of large language models such as ChatGPT in your day-to-day work already. I think there's quite a lot we can already do to apply, to work with language models in sharpening our thinking. Specifically for anything where you need to generate, say, categories. For example, who are all the actors that are relevant to the problem? Monica was just saying, that is a starting point many times. I think I find it very helpful to kind of chat these things through with ChatGPT. Similarly to thinking about behavioral risks. If you tell ChatGPT, this is my intervention, what kind of risks could there be? I find it very helpful almost as a red teaming activity to apply these language models. I think also the kind of problems UNICEF and others are looking at, they often require you to take multiple perspectives on the same issue, right? You will be viewing gender-based violence through a psychological, a sociological, an anthropological, an economic, an historical, a philosophical, and so on perspective. And for me, this is where language models shine, looking at one problem through multiple lenses at once, which can be difficult for humans. I also think it's very helpful to apply to research, generating surveys and, getting a first idea of questions to ask. The issue comes in that these models have been trained largely on weird data. And one should be very cautious when applying it to niche topics. And your own expertise is very much required here to sense check it, which is why I think actually as a red teaming to say like, hey, is my thinking here logical? Did I miss any big category potentially? That's where I would say it really quite shines.
That was really interesting to almost hear how you're using it in the role of a challenger. That's a really good takeaway for me as well in my work. I see Monica has raised her hand. So yes, please go for it.
Thanks, Ibs. Just very two quick points to complement what Nelson and Laura have said so far in terms of usage of AI tools and things that we're already doing. One of the things, I think there's a lot of parallels in terms of like what they've mentioned so far, but one of the things that we're also doing in this space is using AI tools during field work as a live way to interact with participants and in a more like dynamic and interactive way, if that makes sense. So for instance, we've used DALL-E or Midjourney to generate images together with them to see if their answers or what they're telling us about environments that we're not seeing is actually accurate, and we're capturing it in the sort of notes that we have from the field work. Just to give you an example, we wrote a blog post on this. We were doing some work in Jordan looking at increasing uptake of vocational training, and we were talking to parents to understand what was in their minds when they were considering options of vocational training for their children. And together with them, using these tools, we created environments in real time while talking to them in a way that allows us to capture data that we wouldn't have been able to had we been using more traditional qualitative tools in the field. That's one thing. And then the second point I wanted to make is also more maybe on the side of the dangers of using these AI tools, especially where it comes to more complex policy areas. We've talked about gender-based violence. We've talked about maybe work with children. There's a space where we are very carefully thinking about what are the sort of safeguarding precautions and mechanisms you need to put in place before you bring in these tools as an intervention mechanism. And one of them is that, that we're worried about in terms of how the data itself might reflect some of the biases that the AI or the large language model might spit out in some of the answers, if that makes sense, and how you interact with those. So talking to some of our partners on the ground that have been testing an AI chatbot for gender-based violence, one of the things that they told us was that in some of the answers, the LLM actually made up a hotline for like women looking for help. And so you can see all the dangers around something like that. So really testing these things before you roll them out, and as much as you can, controlling some of the underlying data that the AI model is using to provide some of these answers, I think is necessary until we are able to put like these safeguards and precautions in place to make sure that we're protecting the end users.
Yeah, those are some really, really relevant points there. Almost made me think the need for us all to publish this work that we're doing and kind of keep sharing what we're finding in these local contexts as well. And then using that to retrain the AI models could be a good way to go from like take the threat and kind of convert it into an opportunity as we progress in our field. I'm conscious we only have a minute and a half left, but if I could almost challenge Xaher again, I'm so sorry I'm throwing you under the bus with a very heavy topic as well on decolonization, but maybe if you could share your experiences or lessons learned about how do we shift the power dynamics in the humanitarian aid sector?
Right, I will try my best and speak a little slowly. All right, so one of the most frequently encountered problems that I personally have come across and noted over the last 2 decades in this space is that more often than not, SBC in itself is a secondary component to any larger program, which is really aiming at increasing uptake, but SBC comes in more tokenistically. The outcomes that are defined are usually superficial and rarely, if they're ever, driven by a more comprehensive theory of change. It provides, some insight into how we will facilitate that change. Very often, I mentioned this earlier as well, when we're diagnosing behaviors, we also really look at the context in the present, whereas there's a whole history that has created the culture and the geography and all of that coming together to create something that's happening in the present, and having that historical context to why something a certain way is critical. And a lot of the countries where our programs have worked on in the global south, they are still recovering from the effects of colonialism and the post-colonial sort of differences in power and privilege and access to resources. So those need to be taken into account. And however, when programs go into SBC, they very predominantly focus on communication. So the C part of SBCC, where target audiences are looked at as passive recipients of very frequently unempathic information. And it's not uncommon for programs to frame the audience as people who have wrong beliefs and people who suffer from myths and misconceptions. So this is immediately where we disconnect the audience from the program, because now we are in this space that is above them. It's higher than them. We can see what's right, they don't know it. So that sort of creates a reinforcement of these colonial elements. And I'll just cover 3 very quick, tangible things that programs could do to start compensating for this. The first is really to go back to the basics, expand the S in social and behavior change, focus a little bit more on the social side of things. We have the Alma Ata Declaration from 78, but 2 years later, the comprehensive primary care model was abandoned in favor of a more selective primary healthcare model. We went back through the Ottawa Charter for the comprehensive health promotion framework, and then 2008, we got the Commission on Social Determinants of Health and their framework from WHO. We need to return to that thinking around Alma Ata. So returning to Alma Ata is something that I would recommend all folks to look at and think about how they are really, really bringing it together. The second part is, as you're doing your program, take a reflecting moment. And the key question you should ask about the program is our program positioning us as saviors for communities who do not know how to look after themselves? Or are we positioning ourselves in the program as participatory facilitators for these locally led efforts? And then finally, and this is very, very close to my heart, I think this is the missed opportunity for addressing this issue, is that the SBC expertise comes from a global perspective. It's always going to be tapped into locally because there are very few local resources available to tap into locally grounded technical expertise. The discipline is not offered in local professional education programs in the global south. There is a need for external technical experts coming in to interpret the landscape for the local stakeholders. So investing in building that professional thought leadership at the national level is all about yielding those long-term investments in local ownership. And thank you. I don't know if that was a minute and 30 seconds, but
no, thank you so much. I think that was really powerful and some really excellent, concise 3 tips for everyone to take away. So thank you so much, Xaher, and thank you everyone else for such a rich discussion. We are at time for the panel discussion. So if I could nudge us along to the next sort of section where we hear from the people, our audience, who submitted some questions. So Mike, if I could hand over to you to introduce the videos and the people. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much, and impressive, concise answers all around. As you all know, we invited colleagues, UNICEF colleagues in working at country offices to share some questions. So a few people, more than a few, actually shared some videos, which we'd like to just show really quickly. The first is from Jawahir Habib, who is a SBC specialist focused on polio eradication. She sent us a video while working in Sokoto, Nigeria. So I'll turn to her now.
Principles in a conflict setting, my question is, how can we use SBC principles in a conflict setting where we do not have access to, let's say, certain populations with basic health and education services? How can SBC principles help us to create access in those areas for the most vulnerable populations?
So I think there's probably 2 sides to that question. One, of course, is how can SBC principles, help us to gain access or better understand populations who may be inaccessible or otherwise under difficult security circumstances. And I think, how can SBC actually help us to create or promote access to those same populations? Does anyone want to jump on that very easy question? Nelson, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, and this takes me back, to the work that we do. And just by being able to identify and use local influencers down to community levels, at the grassroots levels, it's easy to get into these conflict areas and use relatable people to the audience, to the communities, to pass on the messaging, to drive behavior change through very relatable and believable messaging. And how we're able to create this messaging in conjunction with the developmental partners we're working with is to first of all do an insights kind of survey, where we do a baseline survey by using these influencers to distribute surveys and questionnaires to just get what the audience is actually thinking about, what's going on. And with that relatability and familiarity, they are quite open to say exactly what's on their minds. So as we collect this, we're able to create messaging that will actually drive behavior change, whether it's combating misinfo and disinfo or violent extremism. So that has really worked in the past for us.
Great. Laura, do you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, so just kind of to answer the part of the question that is more about what do we do when we actually have no access? I work quite a lot in scenarios where we had no data on the behavior because potentially we were planning for it and it was in the future and there's no way of looking at that, where there are high stakes. So there's actually, like lots of risks associated with intervening. And the question is, what do you do then, right? You have no data. Maybe you can't run tests. And then the question is behavioral science still relevant here? And my thinking is that the core objective of behavioral science in these circumstances is to surface assumptions that we're making as part of our decision-making about the behaviors at hand. In other words, we need to understand what it is that we are currently uncertain about, what it is that we don't know, and ensure that we're surfacing these uncertainties. And then it becomes a judgment decision task around whether or not we can handle the uncertainties and what potential risks are attached to them if we can't get answers before intervening. And then the next thing is to kind of have experiment or like test in a way that it's safe, right? That you can can fail fast and can say fail safely, essentially, which is not always possible, but I think it becomes SBC applied to internal decision making more than in other circumstances.
Mm-hmm. I think I saw Monica and then Xaher for quick responses as well.
Yeah, just a very quick one from me, just to complement what Laura and Nelson have said so far. I think one of the things that we've done in our work in our space, the first one being working with local organizations is key, and making sure that you're working with them to understand their context, their perspective. They know the norms much better than we do. So like a fundamental first step to me is identifying those key players on the ground that you can work with that have the legitimacy. And then mapping out both potential touch points as well as like structural barriers. I think in understanding the context when you're working in conflict and fragile states, it's even more important to have that as a stepping stone, if that makes sense. Through mapping out the touch points, for instance, in our work in northern Nigeria, one of the things that we did is we introduced an intervention into existing radio shows that were broadcasted to a very large proportion of the population in northern Nigeria. So we didn't have access to the vulnerable population, but we knew how to get to them through those radio shows. And there might be other touch points like those ones that are existing to the vulnerable population that you want to reach in safe ways. So it's important to start by mapping them out. And then when I say identifying the structural barriers is because like behavioral science can only get you so far if the structural issues that might be happening in a complex space or in a fragile state are too wide-reaching, basically. So it's important to understand the sort of circumstances you're working in. And then when you come to thinking about what sort of interventions, I'm very happy to share a link to one of our reports on increasing social cohesion and looking at peace building in this space, because we've been looking at the literature in terms of contact theory, different types of interventions that you could develop to increase both social cohesion and like help with things like recidivism and so on. And the last recommendation, which is one that we learned through our work in peace building in Colombia, we were supporting the government in the implementation of the peace accords with the FARC guerrillas, is that you should also look at the civil servants and the staff that are working in these environments. And that is very important to prioritize their well-being, to think about what you can do about turnover, burnout, because they're operating in very stressful environments, and usually the resources are not allocated to them whatsoever, right? Like they come after the actual target population that we're hoping to help. So them being the delivery mechanism of vulnerable disease interventions, they play a key role, and it's important to also think about their well-being in this context. And we did a little bit of that in our work in Colombia too, which I'm happy to share.
Great. Thank you. Xahar, please.
Right. So I think the statement, certain community being difficult to reach, I'd like to propose a reframe of that statement. A certain community is severely marginalized. So now the question that is asked is now about the community and their existence and the challenge in itself of marginalization, rather than the problem being us not being able to reach them. I think that framing in itself presents the priority for intervention, which is, if you want to change behaviors in a community that you can't access, well, then the first order of business is address marginalization. And for any marginalized community, and we've seen this particularly when we did the work on related to HIV prevention in Pakistan, where there was no data even on those high-risk communities. There is now. The initial investment for a lot of the work that went in was on the social side of things, on movement building, establishing new community-based organizations, investing funds in addressing issues of community efficacy and social capital, building those aspects first. So if a program needs to go into any vulnerable community, it needs to be led by that vulnerable community for themselves, which means the initial period of investment needs to be to make inroads into the community, provide them resources, to have them develop their own platform so that they are accessible. After that, we can go into the more standardized approaches of engaging through communication and other things. So investing in that S part is even more critical for communities that we can't reach.
Really helpful. We're gonna have, I think, I'm just seeing we're running short on time as expected, but we have one more question I think we'll invite from the video. While I'll ask everyone, all the attendees, anyone online, to have any questions you want to have answered as well. And we'll make sure they're answered in one way or the other. So could you share the next question, which comes from Ethiopia, Rachana.
Hi, colleagues. This is Rachna. I work with the UNICEF Ethiopia office. I was just thinking that, do you really think that in near future there is a possibility that just like there are dedicated technical ministries in government, social behavior change could also find space and leverage being a ministry, so that the funding, the systems, the functionaries are easily available for social and behavior change, for quantum leaps, and also to be able to do programs which are at scale. Thank you so much.
What do you think? Do you think it's possible for the SBC to find a space within the systems and structures in the countries in which we work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in how we can integrate behavioral science in public policy design. And I think the key here is that there isn't one way of doing it. And I would caution against taking existing models that work out elsewhere. But my approach usually has been to try and ensure that there isn't kind of a separate unit that, solves a specific set of questions. My approach has always been that of ensuring that the ways of thinking that behavioral science brings, the lens on concrete behaviors, the lens on the human, that is integrated in decision-making structures more broadly. So I think both can exist. You can have like a unit that is responsible for the hard topics, that brings subject matter experts. But at the same time, for me, there is a more fundamental shift, which I'd hope we'll get to, which is that of actually integrating behavioral science more broadly in decision-making. I think it is absolutely possible. I feel like in a lot of countries, behavioral science exists in ministries, just not under that name. There are the right experts a lot of the time already working as civil servants. It's just that they don't have the branding associated with SBC yet. But obviously we need to do our best to leverage this existing thinking and broadening the behavioral science umbrella to include these people, which might not have the background of, the fancy universities with the fancy master title, but which definitely have the skill set to kind of bring on the agendas in their respective countries.
Thank you. And I'm just going to speak for Laura briefly to say she's very kindly agreed to join us, even though she has to catch a flight. So if you suddenly see Laura drop off, she's not being rude. She's running to the airport. Thank you so much for everything. Xaher, did you want to come in now? Did you want to respond to that as well?
Thank you, Laura. I'm sorry for volunteering. I think that already, as Laura said, it does exist. I know from experience that in multiple contexts where we have worked on system strengthening pieces, there's always been some communication or some promotion focal point from the ministry or the buying department who has been a part of those conversations. So they do exist. They need to be better streamlined, I will agree. And I think that, for example, in Pakistan, where I'm based, we are operating, or we've put together a community of practice for SBC practitioners with the aim of being able to advocate with the government for more focused and strategically prioritized integration of SBC thought in priority areas that need intervention. So that opportunity already exists, the interest exists. I think the biggest challenge to that will always be, where will the allocated public sector this is not a department, but as Laura very rightly said, application of that approach as a cross-cutting element for all decision-making that is within.
Right. We have 5 minutes left. What I'm going to propose is, with your permission, we invite Helena to close things off with a huge thanks to everyone who has joined us today, especially our experts. And we take it from there. Thank you so much. And as you said at the beginning, all of this information, all this rich detail, all these practical documents, tools, we'll be sharing right as soon as we can after the webinar. Helena, over to you.
Thank you so much. I really want to thank Laura, Nelson, Monica, and Xaher for their very interesting points on climate change, on gender, on AI, on decolonization, and really doing it in a way that comes from their practice. And very clean, very interesting, and very applicable also for all of us colleagues. So really appreciate the conversations. And of course, I'm sure that we will keep discussing these topics with our ABC of SBC, which is the title of our upcoming podcast in a few months' time. So yeah, rest tuned. Also, thanks so much for all colleagues that have been able to connect today. We will make sure that we repack a little bit this recording so that we can disseminate it among all other colleagues that were very interested, but unfortunately did not make it today. And of course, thank you also to Common Thread, especially to Mike and Ipsita for this fantastic coordination of the meeting. And yes, I think we have a survey, correct, Michael, to finalize the call. Over.
We do. We have a quick survey. I just also want to apologize to those people who did send in a video and we didn't get time for. People who are working in places like Lebanon in the midst of a crisis who took a lot of time to send us something. We unfortunately didn't get to it. We will also include those questions into the final package. So Luca, I'm talking to you. Thank you very much. I also wanted to say in the background, our graphic designer has been working away at some movie posters, which we can show now in honor of our participants, has been working tirelessly to give you a quick sense, just as a way to say thank you and as a way to just share some of the inspiration we got from you, both in your introduction, of course, but in what followed especially. So thank you so much. We do have more questions. If you have more questions, please let us know. This question, the ABCs of SBC, this podcast we will be working on in the coming months with the experts you see here and more. We're really excited about that. So please reach out to us anytime. Thanks also to our interpreters from Natakalam. Again, if you want to learn more about Natakalam, please feel free to reach out to us and all the great work that they do to support refugees and individuals in conflict settings. So we just wanted to end with this. For those of you who aren't rushing to the next meeting, to the next Zoom wall, if you have a chance, please feel free to jump in with some thoughts as you go. Otherwise, we're going to end incredibly with about a minute to spare, and with great gratitude for everyone on the call. And thank you so much for all of this that's coming in. So, and if you'd like a copy of the movie posters, we will distribute them widely. Okay, great stuff. And thanks, Ipsita. You want to say your farewells as well? Thank you so much for guiding us today.
No, thank you, everyone. It was so lovely to hear from you. Nice to see the positive responses coming as well. Laura, have a safe flight. And thank you so much, Monica, Nelson, Xaher, Laura. And a huge shout out to Katrina for those excellent posters as well.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you all. Bye for now.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.